everybody, welcome to Behind the Scenes, a podcast on art, culture, and big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone. I'm the creator of the Out of Frame video series on YouTube and creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education. And with me are my co-hosts, Jen Mafasanti and Paul Nelson. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing fantastic.
Why is that?
My kids are at school right now.
Ooh, that is new.
Yes.
The house is quiet.
Places.
The house is quiet.
This is the, I think I shared this with you guys, the Hotels.com ad that, do you remember Places? I remember Places.
Vaguely.
Your kids vaguely remember Places,
Places
and now
were
they're
so
at a
fun.
place.
They're at a place. It's really out. Yeah, they're in person at school learning things that I am not teaching them.
That sounds fun.
It's really refreshing. Okay, full disclosure, my kids go to a private school.
Yeah.
So,
Well, la-ti-da.
well, you know, we do pay that private school tuition, and it is hefty. I just wish I didn't also have to pay for public school that they've literally never attended. So, well.
Yeah. Or if, you know, it could be worse, you could be paying for public school that is literally not even open right now.
That is true. The county that we live in, the
I
public
guess that's
schools.
technically true for me, by the way. Just,
Yeah.
I'm paying also for public school that
Yes,
I
you
don't
are.
have any children to attend, so
Yep.
For the greater good, though.
for the greater good.
The greater good. Anyway, so the county that I live in, their public school system is an absolute shambles right now. The week before they were supposed to open up, they had like over 200 staff members test positive for COVID.
Wow.
So
Wow.
nobody knows when those public schools are going to be open, if that's going to happen this calendar year at all or not.
Were those COVID cases connected at all? Or
I
were they?
haven't the slightest
Because how would
idea.
they? I mean, they haven't been in school, so you would think that they would have all contracted that
Independently?
separately, independently, in other places, and doing.
I mean,
whatever.
presumably.
Wow,
So,
that's weird.
yeah. And it's not a good look
No,
for the public school system there. But thankfully,
I don't know what's going on. So I live literally right next to a school. There's a school, essentially my backyard, and then like a little tree-lined ditch, and then an elementary school, and they are not open. Which I haven't really been paying attention to the policy side because again, don't have kids attending, but I'm aware of it. I'm pretty aware of when they have school or not because A, there's a bunch of kids running around and I can hear them, and B, it kind of ruins my drive into my neighborhood a little bit because
Yeah.
there's a bunch of one-way stuff that happens and do not enter things that happen in those moments. So they're clearly not doing it. I have no idea when they're going to start up again.
who knows?
Paul, your kids they're not quite that age yet.
No, they're 3 and 1, so they got a couple more years, and we probably won't be sending them to public school either. But yeah, so we took them to Jurassic Quest this past weekend.
How was that?
It was an experience.
Full disclosure, I also went to Jurassic Quest, not with children,
Yes, it was an educational experience.
which is hilarious. Do you want to explain Jurassic Quest? Because
please
this is
do.
a very specific thing that not many people would be
So
familiar with.
the basics of it are it's a traveling carnival of robotic dinosaurs that you can watch, and pre-COVID it was you could walk in and you could actually like ride dinosaurs apparently.
Yeah, they'd have it in like a big convention center kind of thing, or like a big warehouse or something where they'd do it up. This is actually how my wife and I knew about it. Was because we were traveling to Indiana a couple years ago, and on the radio, crossing the border from Kentucky into Indiana, we heard a radio ad for this like dinosaur experience thing, and we were like,
Gotta go.
we should probably stop and see what the heck this is. So on our way back from Indiana, we took a minute and we went to this like I don't remember if it was the same company, but it was the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bunch of animatronic dinosaurs in this like, built out, big warehouse kind of space. They'd lit it and it was dark and they had little fake trees and stuff around. So you'd walk through the jungle and see triceratopses and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was super fun and just kitschy and weird. And my wife and I really like kitschy kind of stuff like that, just because it's going to die and it's not going to exist later. So like there are things that are some of our favorite experiences that just come out of taking those opportunities.
Right.
To see, like we went to a place in Tennessee one time where it's literally it's like a nice little cavern walk, or it's like I don't know how to describe it exactly. You kind of walk through this kind of nice natural rock formation, but they've put gnomes all over the place in little scenes. Mm-hmm. So it's like a whole gnome village that you like walk through, like
That's
garden gnomes and stuff,
amazing.
and like little fairy things and whatever. It's not going to exist forever.
No.
This is something that's on 800 billboards on your way to Nashville. If you're driving to Nashville, it needs 800 billboards because I'm sure not that many people are going to stop.
Gnome World.
I'm trying to remember exactly what it was called, but it's part of like a sort of a batch of a couple different little things there. But the Dinosaur Quest is kind of like that.
Yeah, and they had to pivot. So instead of being in a enclosed space where you walked around, you had to stay in your car and you drove through a parking lot, which for my wife and I kind of took away, but like our boys absolutely loved it.
Nice.
But I kept thinking this entire time, I'm like, what would really make this better is if we found a fossilized mosquito with DNA of dinosaurs and we cloned it. And then we made a park off the coast of Costa Rica.
I mean, yeah, this sounds like a really good business idea.
Sounds like a winner, Paul.
Foolproof business idea.
I think we need that.
You'll probably have to bring, let's say, a lawyer, maybe a mathematician, maybe some paleontologists.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And some kids.
And some kids to test it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You may need just to make sure that it's cool.
Yeah.
See what happens.
That makes the most sense.
But I mean, obviously nothing's going to go wrong. So clearly,
Why would anything go wrong?
huge business venture. On a related note, actually, on a true note, I think it was in Ukraine. Somebody unearthed a new, nearly complete mammoth skeleton, preserved with hair and the whole thing.
Oh,
It's
nice.
nearly complete mammoth. Just came out. I'm kind of waiting for somebody at least to clone a mammoth. This is on a more serious note. I feel like that's going to happen at some point.
I believe that they have done it.
They've done some attempts. I don't know if it came out.
I don't know,
with
but they kind of got an elephant to carry the embryo.
Yeah.
Like,
But I don't remember what happened with that.
I don't either. I don't think I heard anything else about that.
Apart
So
from,
either it failed spectacularly, or they're building a theme park.
apart from just obviously the pitfalls of cloning huge animals that could literally wreck our entire economy, I want to know what they look like for real, because
I do too.
Yeah.
what we know of what we think of as dinosaurs cannot be what they actually look like.
So I've been thinking about that a lot, especially with the Dinosaur Quest thing, because it has like they've modified some of them to have like feathers and stuff like that, kind of try to make them look like what we now kind of assume dinosaurs really look like. But then the other day I saw, for the audience, a thing about me that you don't know is that I have a hedgehog, and he's an adorable little tiny, roly-poly guy.
Yeah, he is.
But the thing about hedgehogs that's interesting, that I think people would be surprised if you just saw a hedgehog, is that they are sort of, in Sonic the Hedgehog way, they are very fast. They are an animal that runs a lot, and generally speaking, in the wild, they might run 5-6 miles a night. And for a tiny little animal, this is quite a lot. And when you actually sort of get, because they have a lot of, they're chubby and they have a lot of skin to like be able to ball up and kind of protect themselves. But when you kind of get to see them in running action, their legs are really long. And so the other day, it was a hedgehog account on Instagram that I follow posted a photo or an X-ray of their hedgehog sort of mid-run. And the skeleton, I mean, apart from having that kind of, different bone structure for the skull and stuff, but like the rest of the skeletal structure looked like a greyhound. Like it just, like you could just scale it up and see like a super fast, lanky dog running. And then you go, okay, if you just looked at the skeleton, you would go, this is a perfect animal built to run, which it is. But then
you don't get everything else that goes
you don't
with
get
it.
everything else that goes with it. So all the stuff that we do with dinosaurs, where we go like, we don't put any fat or any like sort of chubby tendon structure, or there's no,
We do not make ourselves chonkosauruses.
we don't. And then I think, so the Natural History Museum in New York actually did kind of. The new Tyrannosaurus Rex exhibit, which I went to over the holidays this last year, has like a whole new T-Rex exhibit where it's just fully covered in feathers. And honestly, it looks ridiculous. It's like the dumbest thing you've ever seen. And it's not scary at all. And then I think, yeah, but it's a giant goose. And that is terrifying.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So,
Geese, you mess with the honk, you get the bonk.
but yeah, no, it's the dumbest looking, like, because first of all, T-Rex arms already worth making fun of, right? But then now add like this insanely fat, feather covered body with a face that just looks like kind of a dopey. It's not terrifying. It's not what like Steven Spielberg made something that was like horrifying.
Yeah.
And that's been my image of what a T-Rex is my whole life. And then I go to this thing and I'm like, seriously, if in Jurassic Park, if the moment where the T-Rex like eye comes in the window of the Jeep, you'd go, what the hell is it? Like, it would be the funniest, dumbest thing. And you would laugh, and then you'd be like, I should probably be scared of this, but like also,
Yeah.
this is so stupid. But I don't know, we had fun. Your kids had fun.
They absolutely loved it. It was very educational. My oldest son is in a dinosaur phase right now, so he was just going down the.
He's prime age for that kind of thing.
He was going down the line, just naming them all and saying the names correctly, which I cannot do.
Yeah.
He corrects me all the time. We're reading dinosaur books. I'm like, Saurus. And he's like, no, Dad.
No. That was my brother when we were kids. My mom actually, because she really liked doing kind of sciencey stuff with us, she, when my brother was in that phase, and you might actually want to think about doing this. I don't know who's around here, but the University of Nebraska has a pretty significant paleontology department, mostly because there are some dig sites in and around all of the areas that surround Yellowstone, basically, because ash falls preserved tons and tons and tons of fossils. So there was a couple pretty major paleontologists, and we went to meet one of them because my mom just reached out. I think she might have been working for the university at the time, but she reached out and was like, hey, my son,
Oh, that's cool.
9 years old or whatever. She's like, absolutely loves dinosaurs, talks about wanting to be a paleontologist. Can we come down and let us do that when we're little kids?
I'm wondering if this also works with astronauts, because
I bet.
Thing 2 is determined to be an astronaut these days.
I think it's interesting. This is like, I don't know if I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox here for listeners who don't think that this stuff is in reach, but like I've found over the years that if you email, especially academics, like, and you just say, I love what you do, I'd like to meet you, or I'd like to go shadow you for a day, they're really flattered by it and like doing it. Astronauts probably have a lot of time commitments, but like you could probably meet, somebody, or maybe an ex-astronaut or something.
Yeah.
Do it that way. But yeah, I don't know.
Anyway,
Well,
that's
cool.
pretty cool.
That is cool. Well, I don't know how to segue this exactly, because today's film is, it is in some ways about being able to do things that you want to do and empowering people to do things, but not in the most fun of ways.
No.
But we decided, just partly in light of some other recent events that have happened, and just because we had not seen it and wanted to revisit it, to go back to the movie from last year, Bombshell, which was about the Roger Ailes scandal, sexual harassment scandal at Fox News, and just the Fox network in general, starring Charlize Theron as Megyn Kelly and Nicole Kidman as Gretchen Carlson. And then there's a bunch of composite characters that we'll get into in a little bit. And it's heavy, but it is, I mean, I think a lot of people found it to be really empowering. I think we'll talk about how empowering I don't know, it's kind of weird to me to call that movie empowering in certain ways, but obviously what it ultimately is about is power corrupting at the high levels, and then what's our responsibility, or what's the people who are dealing with its responsibility to do something about that. And I think, in that case, clearly went on a long time, as it has, I think, in a lot of areas of our culture. But yeah, what do you guys think of the movie?
It elicited some pretty strong feelings from me. The movie itself was pretty good.
Yeah.
Had a very strong cast. It was well acted. There were some directorial choices that I wasn't fully on board with that would occasionally bring me out of the movie. But at the same time, I think it did a very, very good job of capturing that sense of frustration and helplessness, and what do I do? What can I do? And what is going to happen if I do this? Mm-hmm. That is definitely a very real thing when there is sexual harassment in the workplace going on, particularly if you are the subject of it. So I won't say that I enjoyed this movie.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to the actual vibe of being in a workplace like that, nailed it.
Yeah, this is definitely a movie that I think is tough to enjoy in that sense. I don't think it's made for that. Yeah. Right? I mean, there's a lot of scenes that are really, really uncomfortable. There's mm-hmm. also a lot of just issues that it brings up. Again, about, who is responsible for this stuff? Because, I mean, obviously Roger Ailes is responsible for his own actions and the abuse that he visits on his his employees, but also there's a whole network of people, men and women throughout the Fox environment at the time who, and this, by the way, is not that long ago. I mean, we're talking
just
about
a couple of years.
2016, I think, is basically when all this kind of went down. And there were a lot of people who knew, or who had rumors, or who, had experienced something, who didn't say anything, or, and there are also certainly people for whom something like this happened, and then they were either, paid off settlements, with non-disclosure agreements and things like that, where they couldn't talk about it and those kinds of things. But I guess what really broke loose was Gretchen Carlson, who was having these issues, and at the same time was not happy in her actual role. She had been demoted and, not feeling like she was getting very much support from the network. And she was the first really, really big name person on the network to say something. So that was interesting. And she was played by Nicole Kidman. I thought Nicole Kidman and Charlize Theron did a fantastic job.
Yes.
Yeah. Both of them.
Yeah, Charlize Theron, her turn as Megyn Kelly was amazing.
I didn't even, because she's like the narrator of the film, and kind of it's funny, she's technically the protagonist, I think, of the film, but there's really sort of three characters that kind of centers around a lot. But when she first came on screen, I was like, wait, that's Charlize Theron?
It was impressive.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
It's not just the makeup either.
No.
I mean, like, the makeup did a lot for her, but her voice was Megyn Kelly's, or as close to it as you could imagine. I mean, she did a great job.
Fantastic job.
Really. Yeah. Paul, what'd you think of the movie overall?
I thought it was really well made. The acting was phenomenal, but it was hard to watch.
Yeah.
It made you uncomfortable, which is obviously the point of this. And I was left feeling just kind of like, why would people subject other people? And it's hard to get through. But I highly recommend it.
I would too.
Yeah.
It's a little preemptive in our overall structure of things. But, that's the other thing. I guess we could go back over plot of the movie, but plot's not really, I don't feel like the plot is super important to talk about here. I mean, I think the gist of it is essentially the revealing and sort of unfolding story of, these things that are happening inside this environment. And it's not unclear. I mean, from the very beginning of the movie, it's very clear that Roger is guilty of the things that he's being accused of. So it's not like this a mystery of like, oh, well, did he do this or did he not do this? And also that'd be kind of silly because, it's a historical piece from like recent history. So you're like, well, I think I know the ending of this. And in fact, the ending is, Roger Ailes gets fired and sued and taken out of the, Fox News environment and whatnot. But it is about these three women. Margot Robbie's character, who I didn't mention earlier, is, I guess, a composite of probably a lot of younger people at the network who were having these experiences sort of at 20, 22, 23 years old.
Yep.
Whereas Megyn Kelly represents somebody who had these experiences 10, 15 years earlier, but was not really dealing with them in the present. And then so the question becomes like, is Megyn Kelly responsible? Or what degree of responsibility does Megyn Kelly bear for not sticking up for people or not telling people or warning people about this or doing something to solve that problem? And that's a tough question, I think.
It's a very tough question. And I ask myself that question too often, if we're being honest. I've been in workplaces where sexual harassment was going on, maybe not necessarily against me specifically, but targeting people that I knew and I cared about.
Yeah.
It's tough, especially when saying something can mean your career.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have a family, I have kids, I have bills to pay. What happens if I say something and then lose my job because of it?
Yeah.
Like, I've been in that position, and it's not fun.
So there's a minor supporting character played by Kate McKinnon, who is actually a lesbian Democrat who works at Fox News, which is a fun character to have. And in fact, by the way, I do know some people who work at Fox, and I do think it is kind of a misnomer that Fox is totally filled with conservatives. There are non-conservatives who work there, just like there are anywhere else. Obviously, it is a more heavily conservative-driven news network. And we should talk about the role that Fox plays in some of these things anyway, because I do think that there's a reason that this movie got made against Fox and not, for example, against Harvey Weinstein, who we could be talking about instead. But either way, it's worth the conversation. But Kate McKinnon's character is interesting because she's in exactly that boat. She's kind of aware, or at least vaguely aware, of some of these kinds of things, and yet she
I believe she said she knew about the issues with Bill O'Reilly.
Yes, actually, yeah, she did say she knew with issues with Bill O'Reilly, because she worked on Bill's, I guess on Bill's show. So she said at one point, she explains like, well, why are you working here at Fox? She says, well, I applied at all these other places, and this was the job that I wanted to work in news, and this was the job that I got, basically. And so her position is really, it's a tough one in a lot of ways, because it is like, here I am in New York City trying to make a living and make a career for myself in this business. And if I say something, I'm probably going to lose my job, or I'm afraid of it at least, right? Mm-hmm. So, she's in exactly that spot. It's tough.
it seemed like many people in the company were in that, from the makeup artists all the way up.
Yeah, and that's an interesting facet of some of these things too. And it's not just a sexual harassment thing. I mean, I think this is like any time you see some kind of wrongdoing, and it's funny because, you know, if you've ever been in an environment like that at all, you kind of find that like the vast majority of people aren't on board with this stuff, but are afraid for one reason or another to actually bring it up or make a big issue out of it. But then at some point you kind of have to step back and think like, well, gosh, I mean, if literally everybody in this building just got together one time and said like, oh yeah, we don't approve of any of this.
Yeah, this is not okay.
Yeah.
We're not okay with this, but everybody's detached. Everybody's individually afraid of their own little, you know, arena. And it's tricky. And we've seen this in politics repeatedly. I mean, there are so many of these kinds of things that happen on Capitol Hill, in the entertainment business.
Yes.
I think, and I don't know if this is totally fair, but I tend to think that there's a big connection between this kind of thing and a certain type of power, and that power largely being social power. And I think of that in terms of the news business and in entertainment and politics, where there's a lot of high status aspects to becoming successful in those businesses that aren't necessarily true in like being the CEO of a plumbing company or something. Yeah. And not to say that this might not happen in those environments too. I mean, maybe it very well does. But I think the high profile cases tend to be these ones where they're also very high status, high notoriety individuals. And that's kind of interesting to me.
It happens a lot in restaurants and places, industries where there's a lot of employee turnover because they know if an employee leaves because of a manager's behavior towards them, they'll be replaced immediately by someone else walking in the door needing a job.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I mean, this is the beauty and the curse of looking at things from an economics lens is really thinking about incentives and thinking about the way that a system is structured and think about what the where that balance is, right? So if there is no countervailing incentive, like Megyn Kelly at some point becomes too big to harass, right? At some point, Megyn Kelly is in a position where she would have you fired, right?
Yeah.
At least for most people, maybe not Roger Ailes, right?
Well, she was seemed the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, she was. But I mean, and that's true, and that is really a counterpoint even to what I'm just saying, because Gretchen Carlson is ultimately somebody who she had to fight for it, and it's a tough battle, and she lost a lot of opportunities at the beginning as a result. But yeah, at some point you get successful enough that you can then challenge, But
until then, you have to put up with it, or get out of the business. Those are kind of your options.
Yeah.
And it's not great.
No.
Yeah, I don't want to equate this and I want to be super clear that I'm not equating this. But when I worked in the entertainment industry, there were a lot of aspects of working that industry that just from an intellectual, ideological, and just philosophical standpoint, I did not enjoy. I was constantly around people who were not only had very strong disagreements with me on some pretty fundamental issues, but maybe more importantly, had a lot of power and were very vocal about their beliefs. And so I've been in that position where you kind of have to shut up. Like you can't say anything that you couldn't challenge your boss. Like I had a boss who was worth, north of $100 million, and who owned a very big company that had run huge entertainment, huge shows since the 70s, and he was constantly sending like staff emails out saying like, this is who you need to vote for. Like you need to be hardcore. Like at the time he was a Hillary Clinton supporter. This is in 2008. He was like a hardcore Hillary Clinton supporter, flipped to Obama when Obama actually won the primary. And so he was sending out emails all the time that was basically like, everybody all of my employees, you all need to, get in line and support Hillary, support Obama, whatever. And I actually don't have that much against Obama any more than I have anything against pretty much any president. I was not like a huge anti-Obama person, but at the same time, he was not somebody I would ever support as somebody who's not a progressive, basically. And that's an awkward environment to be in. And then to add to that, the heightened ideological aspect of Fox, the fact that it is kind of a lone institution. Well, this comes up in the movie a lot too, is that like Fox is sort of your only option if you're a conservative, which I'm also not. But if you are a conservative and you wanted to be in the news business,
it's pretty much all you got.
Fox is
your option.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly your A-list option.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's blogs and
there's others, but
websites and stuff.
It's the major leagues.
It's the major leagues.
If you want to be on cable news.
Right. If you want to be on cable news. And then, some of those questions. So it becomes like with Kate McKinnon, you just got to kind of shut up if you want to stay in that environment. Or you can just decide, I'm out, right?
Yeah.
At some point you do that. And there were a couple characters in the movie, I think, who fit that description. I forget one. I think Alice Eve played a character who is maybe doing local news now.
Yeah.
Who was like formerly probably a rising star who then decided,
no,
I'm out.
And now she does the weather
Now
on
she
the
does the
local news.
Right. Which, fine, but not
what she dreamed of.
not
when
what she
was
wanted to do,
growing up.
and the fact that there are those kinds of impediments and abuses of power and all those kinds of things is tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's weird, and what I think this movie probably missed is that when a bunch of women are in an environment where sexual harassment is more likely, we have private conversations with each other. We do. We pull each other aside and be like, sweetie, you look amazing and you need to watch out for that dude. That legitimately happens.
Yeah.
Probably not as often as it should, because there are some very bright, ambitious young women who don't get that message, and they get chewed up and spit out by the powers that be, and it can be soul crushing.
Yeah.
Especially if you know this person, you like them as a human being, and you didn't say anything to her, and something like that happens. Like, if I had just stopped her for 5 minutes, would she still have a career? Would she not be clinically depressed right now? Would she not be back at home looking for work?
So there's a scene. I wrote down one quote from the film. We talked about this a little bit before, but where it's the only time that Megyn Kelly interacts with Margot Robbie's character Kayla, and Kayla she sits down with her and kind of asks quietly, "I heard that maybe you've been having issues with Roger," and she confirmed that yes, in fact, she was, and so she's like, "Well, did you?" And Megyn Kelly sort of acknowledges, again, this is all very kind of hush-hush. I mean, this is kind of right outside of Bill O'Reilly's office, I imagine, at this point. Yeah. But she acknowledges that she did, and then Kayla says, did you think what your silence would mean for us, the rest of us? And Megyn Kelly says, "Roger is not my fault." What's interesting about this whole exchange really is this just clash. It's the only time in the movie that I think we get a really solid clash of worldviews. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So Megyn Kelly says, "Roger's not my fault," and Kayla says, "It would have been nice if somebody had told us that he's after more than legs." And Megyn Kelly's response is, "It's nobody's job to protect you, Kayla." And then Kayla says, "Well, that's all of our job." And it's an interesting exchange, because it's not. I think most people would say, "Well, yeah, obviously it is all of our job." But nobody looked out for Megan either. And it's interesting that she ended up with that as the sort of conclusion to this, which is kind of odd. But at the same time, like one of the things that I've seen, and you and I, Jen and I have talked about this before in one instance that we're both aware of is what's tough for me in some cases that I'm aware of a couple cases of this kind of thing happening, and it's not, and I have not said anything because I've been asked by the person that it happened to not to talk about it.
Yeah.
Which adds a wrinkle to some of this stuff, which is like you want to talk about some things, but you also have to recognize that it's somebody else's life and somebody else's story and career and all of those kinds of things. And when somebody is worried that they're going to be, ostracized from an industry because, now they have this like scarlet letter or whatever. And I don't think it should be a scarlet letter, really. Again, it's not your fault that somebody does something horrible to you, but
it does.
People feel that way.
End up that way.
Yeah.
If you don't say anything, you kind of get the reputation of being accommodating, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do say something, then you are a tattletale.
Yeah.
And nobody trusts you with anything anymore. That is assuming that you still have a job at the end of it.
There was another line in the movie that I remember too, which was like the first rule. He said like first rule of news or something, but I just feel like it's first rule of like life in general is like you don't sue your boss, and that sounds horrible, but like, and it is in certain instances, but it's also kind of, it's interesting how you would balance those things because you can understand why if you were an employer, you'd see somebody who had a history of suing their employers as a pretty big risk to hire.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you want an open enough society that somebody actually has something wrong, that you have legal recourse and you don't feel like you shouldn't do that. Like that would not be an ideal situation to be in. So.
And it's also case by case and circumstance dependent that you can't even make clear rules for your own self about when is it okay to speak up? When is it not okay to speak up? Should I take action? Should I submit an anonymous note to someone?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's so stressful. And there are no good answers to any of this. And sometimes I just don't understand why people cannot treat other people as human beings.
Yeah.
Instead of just things. Because once you start thinking of people as things, that's when trouble really starts.
Mm-hmm. I think what really struck me about Roger Ailes is that he was very paranoid about everything, and then he would go and do this, which obviously opened him up to myriad of lawsuits, blackmail. It doesn't make sense.
If you think somebody's watching you at all times, it is a weird thing to do. But then at the same time, I feel like there were scenes in the film, at least, and again, I don't know what Roger was really thinking in real life, but there are scenes that make it seem like he legitimately doesn't think it's a bad, like the stuff that he's doing. Like, and the stuff we're talking about is really like, there's a lot of comments and stuff, but there's also like touching and worse.
Right.
And, making people undress and things like that. And you just go, yeah, if you were super paranoid, why?
Even if you aren't, why? Like,
and the spoiler of this really is that, like, Gretchen Carlson, she had a plan here. Like, she knew when she sued. She was originally going to sue Fox, but then chose to sue Roger as an individual.
She did her homework, and she was very smart.
She was.
About how she went about it.
And so again, spoilers for this, but she had recorded everything. So she'd gone into meetings with Roger Ailes and recorded what he was saying, and she'd been recording him for a long time. So when the lawyers get involved, they start asking Roger Ailes, like, well, is there any truth to this? And of course, he's issuing like just flat denials, like, no, of course not. This is ridiculous. Why would I ever do this kind of stuff? And then it's all on
And
tape.
then she has the receipts.
Has the receipts. And that might be the lesson to some extent for this kind of thing. Like, because, like, gosh, if you're ever unfortunate enough to be in that kind of a situation, like, yeah, keep tabs on it a little bit.
Write everything down. Get audio recording if you can. And it feels so lonely when you've been put in that position, but you're not alone. There are people in the world who care about you and want to help you.
Yeah.
So
I guess I have two sort of final questions with this. One is, do you think this is something unique to, because I've known a lot of people over the years who would say, oh yeah, this is like capitalism's fault or whatever. And my reading in general is that this is a power thing and government has all the power most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And it happens quite a lot in, all kinds of places. But that would be one question, is like, do you think this is endemic to any particular industry or any particular system? And the other question really is like, do you think it's getting better, or do you think that it's could get better?
It is pervasive throughout the business. I mean, just the world in general. It doesn't matter what industry it is. Maybe there's more industries that are worse than others.
Yeah.
But as far as it getting better, hard to say.
Yeah.
It is hard to say. I think we're keeping track of it much better than we used to. It is no longer socially acceptable for that kind of behavior to occur, particularly in a workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have documentation out on the internet that anybody can see. More people are aware of the situations than ever before. I'm inclined to believe that the actual rate of incidents is probably going down, but because we have more visibility into the incidents, it seems...
We see it more.
Yeah, we see it more. It's very much like police brutality.
Sure.
I mean, you go looking for it, you're going to find it. Yeah. And more people are aware of it than ever before. That doesn't necessarily mean it's occurring at a greater rate than it did in the past.
Yeah. So on that note, I think we should wrap this part of the discussion here. This is a really tough movie. I would definitely recommend it. I will say, like, if you go in with like a partisan lens and you think that this is going to be bashing Fox and conservatives, yes, it is.
They take their shots, but
they take their shots. But it's honestly it's a really well made movie, mm-hmm. and I think that and again, I think this same movie could be told with MSNBC at the center, with a lot of people in the entertainment industry at the center. There are reasons to like, you got to understand the meta context here of like, why they picked this story as opposed to some other stories. That said, I don't think it detracts from the fact that it's a story that's worth telling, and that it's a story that was told really well. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend it. Mm-hmm. It is a tough one. It's like, some of the other movies I've seen, I might compare it to a little bit, are like Spotlight, where you're also dealing with a super uncomfortable, very, very important issue. It's not going to be a light popcorn movie for your evening, but Bombshell.
Yeah, I do recommend it. It is deeply uncomfortable, and you will feel things.
Yeah.
But that's probably why it's important to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that said, for those who are not patrons of Out of Frame, we're going to close the show here. If you want to stick around for some bonus content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/outofframeshow. And for the patrons, stick around. Right after the break, we'll come back with a discussion of another journalistic environment with Citizen Kane. Talk soon.